The sky above the research station always looked different on that planet. It was wider, brighter, and filled with slow-moving silver clouds that almost looked alive. When the young human researcher first arrived there, he didn't know he would end up forming a bond that would change his entire life. At that time, he believed he was simply going to spend a few weeks studying a peaceful alien species, known for their calm nature and their unusual ability to communicate through emotions. He had no idea that the person who led that species, their queen, would one day remember him longer than anyone else ever had. He had come to the planet with a small team from Earth. Their mission was simple: observe, learn, and understand. The alien race was known as the Aerith, tall beings with soft glowing patterns across their skin and gentle voices that seemed to echo even when they weren't speaking. Their world was calm, no wars, no political fights, no chaos, just a culture built on understanding one another's feelings. For someone who often felt misunderstood on Earth, this place almost felt like a quiet dream. On his first day, he tried to blend in, staying close to his team, taking notes, and admiring the remarkable architecture that curved and floated like it was grown instead of built. But everything changed when he met Lysera, the alien queen. She wasn't like the others. She carried herself with grace, but also warmth. Her eyes held curiosity, and her presence filled the entire hall with a soft glow. She spoke in their language, yet somehow reached his thoughts with the emotion behind each word. She approached him out of all people. Not the team leader, not the experts, but him, the quiet observer standing in the back. That moment stuck with him forever. She studied him for a few seconds before she spoke. "You feel different," she said gently. Her words were simple, but they left him speechless. No one had said something like that to him before, especially not a ruler of an entire world. He replied nervously, telling her he was only a researcher, here to learn. She nodded slowly, like she was searching for something in his expression. Over the next few days, Lysera kept finding reasons to speak to him. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was because he didn't hide his emotions the way others did. She once told him that humans felt things loudly, even when they didn't speak. She found that interesting. He didn't quite understand what she meant at first, but he enjoyed those conversations more than he wanted to admit. He asked her about their culture, and she always answered with a mix of pride and softness. She told him how their people shared emotions through light and touch, how they could sense when someone close felt pain or joy. He told her about Earth, about crowded cities and noisy streets, about people laughing, arguing, dreaming, and constantly moving. She listened as if every detail mattered. Soon, their conversations became moments he looked forward to. Even his teammates noticed how often he disappeared from group tasks to wander near the crystal gardens where Lysera liked to spend her evenings. She never ordered him to come, and he never invited her, yet somehow they always ended up in the same place at the same time. They talked about everything: cultures, mistakes, dreams, fears, and the small human stories he carried with him. She didn't judge, she didn't interrupt, and she didn't pretend to know more than him. She simply listened. One night, he told her how he had always felt like an outsider back on Earth. She didn't react with surprise. Instead, she said quietly, "You are not an outsider here." For some reason, those words reached deeper than anything he'd heard before. The bond between them grew naturally, almost without them realizing it. It wasn't romantic, nor was it simply friendship. It was something else, something based on understanding that crossed the barriers of species and worlds. He admired her wisdom, her calm presence, and the way she saw emotions as a language worth listening to. She admired his curious mind, his honesty, and the way he expressed things others hid, but their connection was short-lived. Even though neither of them knew it at first, a cosmic storm had been moving silently through their region of space for months. The scientists back on Earth had been tracking it, but the actual strength of the storm took everyone by surprise. Without warning, the research station received an emergency message from Earth, warning all teams to evacuate immediately. The storm was too powerful, and anything left behind might not survive the waves of radiation. The announcement hit the base like a shockwave. Everyone began packing equipment, shutting down systems, and preparing for departure. People ran through the hallways. Lights flickered. Machines beeped nonstop. It was chaos. And in the middle of all this, he stood still, frozen, because he knew this meant he had to leave. Not later. Not tomorrow. No. He tried to find Lysera, but she reached him first. She appeared in the doorway, her glow dimmer than usual, as if she already understood what was happening. "You're leaving," she said softly. Not as a question, but a truth she had already accepted. He nodded, feeling the weight in his chest grow heavier. "I don't want to," he said, and that was the first time he had admitted something so openly to her. She stepped closer, trying to stay composed as her people watched, but her eyes trembled with emotion. "I know," she whispered, "but your place is with your people. You must go." He wanted to argue, to stay, to promise he would return, but he didn't know if he could. No one knew how long the storm would last, or if travel would be safe again any time soon. So instead, he lowered his head and took a breath he didn't want to take. Lysera raised her hand slightly, and for the first time, she touched his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but with her ability to communicate emotions, the touch carried so much more. He felt her sadness, her hope, her uncertainty, and her quiet wish that he would come back someday. He never forgot that touch dot as the evacuation team gathered at the docking area. Everything felt too fast. He kept turning back, hoping she would appear again, but she remained at a distance, watching from the high platform. She stood tall and calm, the way a queen should, but her eyes followed him with a softness she could not hide. Right before the doors of the ship closed, he saw her lift her hand slightly, not as a formal farewell, but as a silent message only meant for him. He raised his hand back, unable to speak, unable to promise anything, unable to change what was happening, and then the door closed. The ship lifted off, engines humming through the floor. As they left the planet's atmosphere, he pressed his hand against the window, watching the world shrink into a glowing sphere. A part of him felt like he was leading something more than a mission, something he couldn't name yet. He didn't know it would be 5 long years before he saw that planet again. He didn't know how deeply Lysera would hold on to every moment they had shared, and he didn't know how much he would carry the memory of her voice, her calm presence. And that final touch, all he knew was that as the ship drifted farther into space, he already missed a world that no longer felt distant, a world where someone had finally understood him, a world where he had felt seen. He tried to tell himself it was only a mission, only a temporary stay, only a few conversations with an alien queen. But deep down, he understood the truth. Something important had begun there, and even though he was gone, it had not ended. 5 years passed like a slow tide for the young human researcher. Back on Earth, the days felt longer, emptier, and somehow heavier. He tried to return to a normal life, but nothing seemed normal anymore. Even the people around him, friends and colleagues, felt distant. Conversations felt shallow, and laughter felt hollow. He realized, slowly, that part of him had been left on that distant planet, in a place where someone had truly understood him. The memory of the alien Queen Lysera never left his mind. At first, he threw himself into work. Reports, studies, conferences. He kept busy to avoid thinking about what he had left behind. Yet every night, when the world quieted and the stars appeared, his thoughts always returned to her. He remembered her soft glow, her gentle voice, and the way she had listened without judgment. He remembered how she could sense emotions in ways humans never could. He remembered that last touch on his shoulder before the evacuation, carrying more feeling than any words could. Friends often asked him about his time on the alien world. They assumed it had been a short adventure, a story to share at parties. He tried to smile, shrugged, and spoke of the research, the beauty of the floating cities, the unusual culture. But he never mentioned her name. It felt like saying it aloud would make the memory real in a way he wasn't ready for. That bond was too personal, too quiet, too fragile to risk being reduced to words. In the first year, he tried to date, to meet new people, to feel connected again. But it was impossible. No one had her calm understanding. No one had that ability to make him feel completely accepted. Each attempt ended with him quietly stepping away, realizing that he could not replace a connection that had been built across worlds. The distance between them was physical, yes, but it was also emotional. He carried her memory everywhere. Meanwhile, on the distant planet, Lysera did not forget him. Time passed differently for her people, but memories were alive in a way humans rarely experienced. Every day she recalled his face, the slight hesitations in his voice, the way his eyes lit up when he understood something new. She had never met another human before, and yet she felt that something in him had touched her in a way that no one else had. She told herself she must focus on her duties, on her people, on the responsibilities of ruling. Yet privately, she would wander through quiet halls, pausing at places where they had spoken, replaying conversations in her mind, sometimes smiling, sometimes feeling a quiet ache. The council of her people noticed the change in her demeanor. She was still their queen, wise, composed, thoughtful, but there were moments when she seemed distracted, distant. She hid it well, never letting anyone see her emotions fully, but those closest to her sensed that her thoughts often drifted to something or someone far away. Yet she could not speak about it. To admit it would be to reveal a vulnerability, one her position did not allow. So she held it in, quietly and faithfully, reliving memories that only she could understand. During this time, the human researcher continued his life on Earth. He kept journals, not about his work, but about his experiences on the alien planet. He wrote about the people, the architecture, the culture, and most of all, about Lysera. Not in a way that would be published or shared, but in a way that helped him preserve the connection. Writing was the only way he could feel close to her when the distance felt unbearable. Occasionally, he would imagine her standing in the crystal gardens, waiting, glowing softly under the alien sky. He imagined what she might be doing now, whether she still remembered him, whether she thought of him as much as he thought of her. He imagined her speaking to the council about him, describing the human who had touched her life briefly but indelibly. These thoughts were comforting and painful at the same time. They made him long for something impossible, yet they kept hope alive. Years passed with his quiet ache. He watched the seasons change on Earth, the leaves turning, the snow falling, the sun rising and setting. He achieved professional milestones, met colleagues who admired his work, and even spoke at conferences about space exploration. Yet nothing in his achievements replaced the connection he had lost. He realized that even success felt empty without someone who truly understood him. On the alien world, Lysera continued her duties with careful precision, but in her private moments, she allowed herself the memories. She remembered how he had laughed at small things, how he had hesitated before speaking, how his curiosity had been endless. She remembered the way he had looked at her with respect and fascination, and the way he had seemed both fragile and strong at the same time. These memories became her secret refuge, a place where she could feel warmth in her heart, even during the hardest days of leadership. The researcher tried to plan for the future, though uncertainty weighed on him. He knew he could not stay away forever, though he could not articulate why. There was a pull, a silent invitation from the memory of someone who had changed him deeply. He often found himself staring at the night sky, imagining the planet far away, wondering if she was doing the same. Imagining him, thinking of him, remembering moments they had shared. His work eventually brought him into contact with a new space exploration program. This program was designed for long-term missions, including potential contact with distant civilizations. When he saw the announcement, a mix of fear and excitement filled him. Could he ever go back? Should he? 5 years had passed so much time for both of them. He wondered if she would even remember him, or if their bond had faded with time. He thought about the touch of her hand, the sound of her voice, the soft glow of her presence. And he knew he could not ignore the possibility of returning. Even as he considered this possibility, the memories weighed heavily. He remembered leaving too quickly, the chaos of the storm, the way she had held back her emotions to stay composed. He wondered if she had felt abandoned, if she had believed he had left willingly, or if she had understood the necessity of his departure. These questions haunted him, mingling with hope and fear, making the decision to return both urgent and terrifying. Meanwhile, Lysera continued to honor her duties while keeping the memories alive. She rarely spoke of him to anyone, yet the bond was not forgotten. She kept certain personal spaces untouched, small reminders of their conversations, the subtle signs of his curiosity, and even the faint traces of his presence in the gardens. The memories were a quiet flame, steady and unwavering, keeping him alive in her thoughts for all the years he was away. The human researcher eventually realized that he could not remain on Earth any longer without attempting to reconnect. He began preparations quietly, not telling colleagues or friends. It was not just a mission anymore. It was a journey of the heart, a chance to see if the bond he felt was mutual, if the memories she held were as vivid as his own. He knew the risks, knew the challenges, but the hope of returning to her was too strong to ignore. Even as he prepared, he reflected on the past 5 years, the solitude, the longing, the quiet nights filled with stars and memories. He understood that he had changed, grown, and matured. Yet the most important growth had been the understanding of what it meant to be remembered, to have a connection that transcended distance. Time, and even worlds.ly era 2, would sense something was coming. Although she could not explain it, there was an awareness in her that the human might return. A subtle shift in the wind, the faintest echo in her mind, the sense of anticipation in the air small signs she had learned to recognize. She felt both excitement and apprehension, knowing that the bond they shared had remained strong, yet fearing how much had changed in the years apart, as Earth and the distant planet continued on their separate paths. 2 lives remained tied by invisible threads of memory, emotion, and understanding. Both had lived in the shadow of the other's presence. Both had kept the connection alive quietly, and both had learned the subtle truths of patience, longing, and hope. 5 years apart had been long, but it had not been enough to erase what had been formed. It had only made it stronger. The stage was set for a reunion, though neither of them could yet imagine how it would unfold. For now, the human researcher carried the weight of years in his heart, and Lysera held a quiet flame of memory in her mind. Each day, each thought, each breath was colored by what they had shared. And although the distance remained, it was no longer empty. It was full of anticipation, promise, and the silent knowledge that some connections are never truly lost, no matter the time or space between them. The day he finally returned to the planet felt surreal. Even before landing, he stared out of the small viewport of the spacecraft, trying to recognize the world that had shaped so many memories of him. The floating cities gleamed like polished crystals under the twin suns, rivers of light twisting through the landscape like liquid glass. Everything seemed the same, yet subtly different. Time had moved on, but it had not erased what he had once known. As the ship descended, his mind raced with anticipation. 5 years ago, he had left hurriedly, in a storm of confusion and fear, with only memories of a queen who had touched his life more deeply than anyone else ever had. Now, as the craft touched the surface gently, he wondered whether she would remember him at all. Would the bond they shared still hold in her mind, or had time eroded the connection, leaving only faint traces? The moment he stepped out of the ship, the air felt different, crisper, charged with an energy he had almost forgotten. The colors were sharper, brighter, and the soft glow of the alien world seemed to welcome him silently. Yet he knew he could not act as if nothing had changed. The council, the people, the queen herself, they all had grown older, wiser, and more cautious. He had no idea what awaited him. Lausera sensed him before she even saw him. Her people often joked that their queen could feel the faintest ripple of emotion from across the city, and in this case, she did. It was not just curiosity or instinct. It was the unmistakable signature of someone who had been part of her heart. Her pulse quickened slightly, though she kept her composure. The council meetings were behind her, the ceremonial duties attended to, and now, for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel. He walked through the familiar halls of the palace. Each corridor, each archway, each subtle glow reminding him of times long past. He tried to steady his breathing, to appear calm, but his mind was flooded with memories of shared conversations, quiet laughter, and those moments of silent understanding that had bound them together. He had been careful not to rush, knowing that appearances mattered here, that respect and caution were key in a place governed by centuries of tradition. Finally, in a courtyard lit by glowing flora, she appeared. Lausera stood taller than he remembered, regal yet graceful, and her glow seemed softer, tempered by 5 years of leadership and responsibility. She looked at him for a long moment, as if measuring whether the memories were real, whether the emotions that had lingered in her heart matched what he carried. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to pause. No words were spoken, but the emotions between them were louder than any sound. Relief, anticipation, uncertainty, and recognition swirled together, almost overwhelming in their intensity. He felt it too, every memory, every touch, every moment replaying with vivid clarity. 5 years had passed, yet here they were, standing as if time had not moved at all. Lausera broke the silence first, her voice soft, careful, yet unmistakably her. "You've returned," she said, almost a statement, almost a question. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I never stopped thinking about this place." "Or you," he admitted quietly. The words hung between them, fragile yet powerful. He saw her reaction carefully, noticing the subtle shift in her expression, the faint flicker of warmth in her eyes. She did not speak immediately, only studied him as if trying to see the person he had become over the years. It was clear that both of them had changed. He was no longer the wide-eyed researcher who had wandered through her halls in curiosity. He had grown more confident, tempered by years of reflection and distance. She was no longer simply the queen he had met. She carried the weight of leadership, experience, and wisdom that made her presence even more formidable. And yet, despite the changes, something fundamental had remained the same, the connection that had drawn them together in the first place. The council noticed the encounter too. Whispers circulated among the advisors, curious about the human who had returned after so long. Some were skeptical, questioning his motives, wondering if he had come to manipulate or deceive. Others sensed the quiet strength in his presence, the sincerity in his gestures, and the obvious bond he shared with the queen. But Lausera ignored the council, focusing only on the human who had once left her world and now returned. He walked slowly toward her, careful not to overstep, careful not to force an interaction that needed time. She did not move away, though her posture remained formal, a careful balance between openness and dignity. He realized then that she had not forgotten him, not a single moment, not a single detail of their time together. It was all still alive in her mind, as vivid as the first day they had met. Their first conversation after 5 years was careful, cautious, and layered with meaning. He spoke of his experiences on Earth, the years of longing, the challenges of life, without the world they had shared. She listened intently, her expression calm, but her mind alive with emotion. She did not interrupt, did not judge, only allowed him to speak, and understood him in a way that no one else ever could. Then she spoke, her voice carrying both authority and tenderness. She asked about his life, his thoughts, and his feelings during the long years apart. He realized that she remembered everything, not just his words, but the subtle patterns of his thoughts, the way he reacted to joy and sorrow, the small habits that had made him uniquely him. It was as if time had only strengthened her memory, polishing it until every detail shone with clarity. The human researcher was overwhelmed by the depth of her memory. He had feared that time might have dulled her recollection, that the bond they shared had faded. But it had not. She remembered him in the smallest details. How he had paused before speaking in awe of her city. How he had laughed quietly at things only he found funny. The way he had looked at her with a mix of curiosity and respect. Every memory was alive, as if it had waited patiently for this reunion. Yet, despite the recognition, there was tension. Time apart had created uncertainty. He did not know how much she had missed him, and she did not know how he would react to the years of change in her world. Both had grown, and yet the old connection needed to be tested against the reality of their present lives. They walked together slowly, sharing observations about the city, the gardens, and the changes that had occurred in his absence. Every detail was a thread, weaving together the fabric of shared memory and renewed understanding. The human noticed small changes, too. Lysera's glow had a subtle warmth now, more controlled and deliberate. Her gestures were precise, yet there was a softness in her eyes that spoke volumes. He realized that the years of leadership had honed her presence, but they had not erased the personal connection they had built. He felt a mixture of admiration and relief, grateful that time had preserved what mattered most. They found a quiet place in the palace, away from the council and the public, where they could speak freely. For hours they shared stories, laughed softly, and occasionally fell silent, simply enjoying the presence of the other. Words were not always necessary. Sometimes a glance or a small gesture carried more meaning than entire conversations. He realized that this was what he had missed, the simplicity of being understood, completely and without pretense. As the day turned to night, the floating cities glimmered under the twin moons, casting soft reflections across the courtyards and waterways. They stood together in quiet contemplation, aware that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The bond that had survived 5 years of separation was stronger than either of them had imagined. Yet they both understood that rebuilding trust, understanding, and shared connection would take time. The human researcher felt hope for the first time in years. The uncertainty of their reunion was balanced by the certainty of memory, emotion, and shared experience. He knew that the Queen still recalled every moment they had shared, and that knowledge was enough to sustain him, to guide him, and to remind him that some connections, once formed, are never truly lost. Lysera, too, felt a quiet reassurance. She had remembered him through all these years, and now, finally, he was here. The emotions she had kept hidden, the memories she had cherished privately, were now part of a shared reality. Their reunion was delicate, careful, and deliberate, but it was also filled with warmth, understanding, and a subtle joy that words could not fully capture. As they prepared to face the council and the people together. Both knew that their journey was just beginning. The human's return had sparked more than curiosity. It had reopened possibilities, challenged assumptions, and reminded both of them of the quiet, enduring power of connection. And while the past 5 years had been long, the future now held promise, hope, and the chance to create something meaningful together, even as they walked side by side through the glowing courtyards. They understood that nothing could erase what had been shared. Time and distance had tested them, but it had also strengthened the bond. And for the first time in years, both felt the quiet certainty that they were no longer alone in their memories, that the connection they had built, nurtured, and preserved would guide them forward, together, into the days yet to come. The first few days after his return felt like stepping into a dream. The city still shimmered with its soft lights and flowing architecture, yet every corner, every path, reminded him of memories he had carried for 5 long years. The presence of Lysera was constant, both comforting and disarming. She moved with the same grace, her glow soft but steady, but there was a new weight in her eyes, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and unspoken emotions. Time had changed both of them, and now they had to navigate the space between memory and reality. He noticed the subtle shifts immediately. The palace was busier, more structured, with council members moving through corridors with authority and precision. Decisions were made faster, rules were stricter, and yet the queen moved calmly through it all. She had grown stronger, more confident in her role, yet he sensed that beneath the regal composure, she carried the remnants of the connection they had shared, hidden carefully. She smiled less freely than before, spoke more formally, and kept her personal moments guarded. For him, it was an adjustment too. He had imagined this reunion countless times, building scenarios where they would laugh easily, share stories without hesitation, and rekindle the bond as if no time had passed. Reality was more complex. They were both changed by 5 years apart. He had grown older, more aware, and more cautious. She had grown wiser, more disciplined, and more guarded. And yet, in the quiet moments when they were alone, the old connection surfaced effortlessly, shared smiles, silent understanding, and glances that spoke louder than words. The council watched them carefully. They were intrigued by his return, but also wary. 5 years had passed, and a human returning to their world was unusual, even unsettling. Some members whispered among themselves, questioning his motives, fearing that his presence might disrupt the order they had carefully maintained. Others noticed the subtle recognition between the human and the queen, and they speculated that there might be a deeper bond, one that could either benefit or challenge their society. Lysera navigated the council with care. She maintained her authority, answered questions with precision, and projected the composure expected of a queen. Yet, in private moments, she allowed herself to acknowledge the subtle joy of his presence. She would pause in her chambers, remembering the conversations they had shared, the gentle laughter, the quiet moments in the gardens. Those memories were no longer just fragments. They were part of her present, quietly influencing her decisions, her emotions, and her attention. For the human, the tension was palpable. He had anticipated ease, warmth, and immediate reconnection, but the reality required patience and observation. He had to understand the changes in her world, the new dynamics of the council, and the subtle expectations placed on her as a leader. He could not simply relive the past. He had to navigate the present, respect the responsibilities she carried, and find ways to reconnect without forcing their bond. Their first private conversation after the reunion was tentative. They spoke about small things the city, changes in the gardens, new innovations, but each word carried layers of unspoken meaning. He could sense her curiosity, her restraint, and the quiet questioning of whether the bond they shared had survived the years apart. He answered honestly, speaking of his experiences on Earth, the loneliness, the longing, and the hope that had carried him through the separation. She listened, not interrupting, her eyes reflecting both recognition and caution. There were moments of silence, too. These were not uncomfortable silences, but spaces where the connection between them spoke without words. He could feel her attention, her awareness of his emotions, and she could sense the quiet admiration, respect, and lingering affection he held. Those moments were fragile, delicate, and precious proof that their bond had endured despite time, distance, and change. Yet, tension existed beneath the surface. He noticed the careful distance she maintained in public, the way she moderated her gestures, and the subtle formality in her tone. She, too, noticed his hesitance, the way he observed before acting, the careful attention he paid to her reactions. Both were aware that reconnecting required balance, patience, and a willingness to navigate new circumstances while honoring the old bond. One evening, they walked through the gardens, the soft glow of plants illuminating their path. The world was serene, yet charged with unspoken emotion. He spoke first, reflecting on the time he had spent away, how he had thought of her constantly, and how the memory of their bond had shaped his choices and his feelings. She listened, her expression softening slightly, her glow dimming and brightening as her emotions surfaced subtly. "I remembered every detail," she admitted quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "Every conversation, every gesture, every moment we shared. It never left me." Her words struck him deeply. He realized then that the distance had been mutual. She had carried the memories as faithfully as he had, preserving their connection with care and patience. He felt relief and gratitude, tempered by the awareness of the challenges ahead. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "Even when I was far away, I hoped this day would come." They paused, standing under a flowering tree that glowed softly in the alien night. The air was still, and the city seemed to hold its breath around them. He could sense her emotions, a mixture of warmth, caution, and anticipation. She could sense his feelings too: honesty, respect, and lingering affection. Neither spoke for a long time, content to let the quiet carry the weight of years and memories. Over the following days, they continued to navigate the delicate balance of reconnecting. Public appearances required composure, protocol, and awareness of the council. Private moments allowed for more openness, gentle laughter, and conversations that revisited shared memories. He learned about the challenges she faced as a leader, the decisions, the responsibilities, and the weight of guiding an entire world. She learned about his life on Earth, the loneliness, the professional achievements, and the quiet longing that had never left him. There were small misunderstandings along the way. Differences in culture, communication, and expectation occasionally caused tension. He misread cues, she misinterpreted hesitation. Yet each challenge was met with patience, explanation, and willingness to understand. Slowly, the bond that had survived 5 years apart began to strengthen in the present, adapting to the realities of their current lives while honoring the past. One afternoon, they walked along the edge of a glowing river, watching light ripple across the surface. He spoke of his hopes for collaboration, cultural exchange, and understanding between their worlds. She listened, intrigued by his perspective, impressed by his sincerity, and quietly moved by the depth of his connection to her world. She realized that he had grown into someone thoughtful, reflective, and genuinely committed to building bridges, not only between their species, but also between their hearts. Even with progress, there were moments of hesitation. He wondered if she would ever fully trust him, if the memories of his sudden departure 5 years ago would cast a shadow. She wondered if he could understand the full extent of her responsibilities, the challenges she faced, and the weight of her decisions. Both had to confront uncertainty, learn to communicate more openly, and allow themselves to be vulnerable without fear. Through it all, the subtle moments were the most powerful. A shared glance, a quiet smile, a hand brushing against a glowing petal, These small gestures reminded them of the connection that had endured across time and distance. They did not need grand declarations or dramatic events. The bond was strengthened in the quiet, in the presence, in the patient rebuilding of trust and understanding. By the end of the week, a pattern had emerged. Public appearances were handled with composure, protocol, and elegance. Private moments were filled with conversation, laughter, and shared memories. Slowly, cautiously, they began to trust that the bond they had built before the storm could exist in the present. Adapted to the challenges of the world they now shared. Yet both knew the journey was far from over. The council remained observant, subtle tensions persisted, and the dynamics of a society that had grown in his absence added complexity. Rebuilding their connection required patience, insight, and courage. It required them to navigate both personal and political landscapes with care, ensuring that trust, respect, and understanding remained intact. Still, the hope remained stronger than doubt. The human researcher had returned, and the Queen remembered every moment they had shared. The bond had endured, quietly and faithfully, surviving 5 years of separation. Now, as they continued to walk side by side through the gardens, observing the soft glow of the alien night, both felt a sense of possibility. They could rebuild, renew, and nurture a connection that was rare, meaningful, and deeply human, even across the boundaries of worlds. The tension, the uncertainty, and the unspoken emotions were not obstacles. They were part of the process. Each step, each conversation, each shared glance brought them closer, teaching patience, understanding, and the delicate art of reconnecting after years apart. And as the alien moons reflected in the glowing river, they both knew that while the path ahead would require care and attention, the bond they had preserved across time was a foundation stronger than either had realized. The days following their reunion passed in a delicate rhythm, a mixture of routine and discovery. He spent time learning more about the planet and its people, observing how Lysera led her world with precision and care. It was clear that 5 years had strengthened her wisdom, sharpened her insight, and deepened her understanding of responsibility. Yet beneath her composed exterior, he could sense the quiet echo of the bond they had shared, subtle smiles, glances that lingered, and moments of unspoken understanding that no one else could see. He joined her on walks through the gardens, discussions in council chambers, and visits to distant parts of the city. Everywhere he went, he noticed the care she took in guiding her people, the way she balanced authority with empathy. It was impressive, humbling, and a little intimidating. He realized that while the connection between them was personal and emotional, it was also intertwined with the responsibilities she carried. Every interaction, even casual ones, was influenced by the weight of leadership. Their private conversations became more frequent. They spoke of Earth, of the years apart, of what had been lost and what could be regained. They shared laughter, quiet observations, and moments of vulnerability. Each conversation revealed layers of their personalities that had not been apparent before: his resilience, her patience, his curiosity, her thoughtfulness. The bond they had formed before the storm began to grow stronger, now enriched by experience, understanding, and mutual respect. He noticed the subtle ways she watched him, as though studying not only his words, but the emotions behind them. She asked questions carefully, seeking to understand not just his actions, but his thoughts and feelings. He, in turn, observed her closely, noticing the smallest gestures, how her eyes lit up when she spoke of something she loved, how her hands moved when she was thinking, the quiet glow that seemed to respond to her emotions. These observations deepened his appreciation, reminding him why the connection had been so meaningful before. There were challenges, too. He was aware that his presence could create tension within the council. Some members were cautious, wondering whether a human returning to their world could bring disruption or unforeseen consequences. Others were curious, seeing the bond between him and Lysera as a potential bridge between worlds. These subtle political currents required him to navigate carefully. He had to respect the customs, understand the hierarchy, and maintain a balance between personal feelings and public responsibilities. Lysera guided him through this delicate process, teaching him when to speak, when to observe, and when to act. She did not force him into her world, but she offered insight and support, allowing him to learn and adapt while preserving the authenticity of their connection. It was a lesson in patience, humility, and understanding qualities he had begun to develop over the years, but now learned more deeply in the context of another culture and society. One evening, they walked along the edge of the city, where glowing rivers reflected the twin moons above. He spoke of his hopes for collaboration, for understanding between their worlds, and for building a shared future. She listened carefully, offering insights from her perspective, sometimes challenging his assumptions, sometimes agreeing with a quiet smile. The conversation was a dance of ideas, emotions, and mutual respect, a dialogue that deepened both their connection and their understanding of each other. During these walks, he noticed the subtle way her emotions responded to him. She did not reveal everything, but small gestures, the shift of her glow, the light in her eyes, hinted at the depth of feeling she had preserved over the years. He realized that she had not only remembered him, but had also thought about the possibilities of this reunion, the challenges they would face, and the ways their connection could grow stronger. They began sharing small moments of intimacy, not physical, but emotional. A quiet conversation in a garden, the exchange of a small gift, a glance that conveyed recognition and care. These moments were delicate yet powerful, reminding them both of the enduring bond that had survived years of separation. They were learning how to weave the old memories with the present reality, creating a tapestry of trust, understanding, and quiet affection. The council continued to watch, though their skepticism softened as they observed the sincerity and respect in the interactions between the human and the queen. They could see that he was not there to manipulate or disrupt, but to reconnect and understand. They saw the patience and care in Lysera's guidance, and they began to trust that this connection could coexist with the responsibilities of leadership. Yet, despite the progress, challenges remained. He sometimes struggled with cultural nuances, misunderstandings, and the subtle pressures of court life. She occasionally had to remind him gently of protocols, expectations, and the careful balance required in public. These moments were not obstacles, but opportunities to learn, to adapt, and to grow together. Each challenge they faced strengthened their bond, teaching them patience, communication, and the importance of trust. One afternoon, they visited a distant garden on the outskirts of the city, a place he remembered from before the storm. The glowing flora, the soft river, and the quiet ambience brought back memories of their first conversations, their tentative explorations of trust and understanding. He felt a rush of nostalgia, mixed with a deep appreciation for the present. She noticed the shift in his demeanor and offered a small smile. Acknowledging the shared memory and the emotions it carried, they spoke quietly, revisiting past experiences, sharing reflections on how time apart had shaped them, and exploring their hopes for the future. He realized that the bond they had shared before had matured, becoming richer, more nuanced, and more resilient. She realized that he had grown in wisdom, patience, and understanding, and that their connection was now strengthened by shared experience and mutual respect. Over the following days, they worked together more closely. He assisted in cultural projects, shared ideas for collaboration between worlds, and participated in initiatives that strengthened the bonds of understanding. She guided him with care, allowing him to contribute meaningfully while respecting the structures of her society. Their partnership became a blend of friendship, trust, and quiet affection an evolving connection that balanced personal feelings with shared responsibilities. In private moments, they reflected on the past and the future. He admitted fears of inadequacy, the uncertainty of reconnecting, and the lingering ache of years apart. She shared the challenges of leadership, the weight of expectation, and the quiet longing she had felt in his absence. These conversations deepened their emotional intimacy, allowing them to navigate vulnerability, honesty, and mutual support. There were also moments of joy, laughter, and playful discovery. He observed her fascination with small things, shared jokes, and sometimes allowed himself to let go of the formalities that public life demanded. She, in turn, appreciated his perspective, his curiosity, and the warmth he brought to moments that might otherwise have been filled only with responsibility and duty. As the days turned into weeks, they developed a rhythm, a balance between public obligations and private connection. The bond that had survived 5 years apart now grew stronger in the present, tempered by patience, understanding, and shared experience. They were learning not only how to be together, but also how to navigate the challenges of their respective worlds, blending personal connection with the responsibilities that shaped their lives. The human realized that his return was more than a personal journey. It was a bridge between two worlds. Lasara realized that the bond they shared could influence not only their private lives, but also the broader connections between their peoples. Together, they were discovering that connection, trust, and collaboration could coexist with duty, responsibility, and leadership. In quiet moments, they would sit by the glowing rivers, observing the twin moons, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here, and considering the possibilities that lay ahead. Each moment reinforced the understanding that the past, with all its memories and emotions, was not lost, but a foundation on which they could build a meaningful present and future, even as challenges remained protocol. Council scrutiny, cultural differences, and personal uncertainties, the bond they shared provided a constant source of strength. They knew that patience, communication, and understanding would guide them through difficulties, while shared memory, care, and affection would sustain them across time and circumstance. By the end of the 5th week, they had established a delicate harmony. Their connection had deepened, trust had grown, and the unspoken emotions between them were acknowledged, respected, and nurtured. The human understood the responsibility of being part of this world, while Ysera embraced the possibility of shared connection without compromising her leadership. Together, they were building something rare, meaningful, and enduring, an alliance of heart and mind, memory and presence, across worlds and time. And as the twin moons reflected softly on the flowing rivers, they walked side by side, aware that their journey was far from over, yet confident that the bond they had preserved for 5 years had not only survived, but flourished. Their connection was no longer just a memory. It was alive, resilient, and full of potential.